I wanted to have one final prop with me, but I couldn't get it. Well, I could have, but I chose not to. Helpfully, that helps illustrate what I wanted to use the prop for anyway. Okay, so a chocolate orange is what I was going to bring. It's okay. It's all right. Someone's got one. I love chocolate oranges. It's like my favorite snack, sweet treat. And I was going to use it to say to you that being a Christian is like buying a chocolate orange, okay? And that is because, it's going to make me sound old, but in my lifetime, the cost of chocolate oranges has gone up a ridiculous amount. I used to be able to buy a chocolate orange for 75p. Exactly. What a great response. No! I was going to buy one to use as my prop on the way down here, and at the service station that I stopped at, they were selling them for £4.50. Exactly, yeah, £4.50, which is ridiculous. So I didn't buy it. Apologies. You weren't worth the £4.50. But the point is this. It is getting more and more costly to be a Christian in our country. Just like the cost of chocolate oranges is going up as well. Now I know that actually, it's maybe not £4.50, but £2 or whatever is well worth it, okay? I love a chocolate orange, great snack, great in a hot chocolate, well worth the price. But the question I want to sort of finish with in our last time together is it worth the cost, the price of being a Christian? Is it worth it? And there'll be different people in the room, and it's been great chatting to a couple of you while I've been here and hearing that you guys would say, you're not Christians. And I just say that it's great that A, you're honest, B, that you're here, that you're investigating, you're thinking about it. That is great. So hopefully, as you hear what I'm going to say, you're going to see that I think it's worth the price, but at least will you see that this is a serious decision. The stakes are high. The price is high. Some of you in the room are what I would call coasting Christians. Perhaps you've been a sort of Christian all your life. You've been brought up in a Christian home, and it's just part of life. But it's not maybe that meaningful to you, or it doesn't perhaps have that much of an impact on your life. You know, would you factor it in to the decisions you're making now about your future? Perhaps you're on that. Well, again, I want you to see that the price of being a Christian and following Jesus is well worth it. And it's worth taking seriously rather than coasting. And then there'll be some of you who might put yourself in the category of committed Christian. You know, I'm all in, I'm so enthused, I've been lapping up, reading my Bible and praying, and I'm all out for Jesus. Every decision I ever want to make is all about him. Great. I hope you're encouraged as well that it is worth it. It is worth the price. And we're going to read our last little bit in Exodus. We're in Exodus chapter 12. So if you're the kind of person who likes to follow along, you're welcome to turn up Exodus chapter 12. And I'm going to read a few verses. And the passage that we're reading is about the Passover, which is linked to the final plague that comes upon Egypt. The plague of death in each household. So Exodus chapter 12, we're going to start at verse 1. I'm going to read 13 verses or something. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share with one of their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night they're to eat the meat roasted over the fire along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some of it is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It's the Lord's Passover. On that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. The stakes of Christianity are high. This passage tells us just how high they are. God is going to judge humanity. And here we have a little snapshot of what that is going to be like. And there is either death or life. When it comes down to it, that is what Christianity is about. When God comes in judgment, will there be death or will there be life? Now, this only makes sense if you sort of believe what we were thinking about earlier today in terms of the importance of your sin. If you don't think sin is a big issue, then this just sounds incredibly over the top. Really? Death? Death of the firstborn in all the houses? Really? Really, God? Well, if you can get your head around God being the great I am, the one who sits outside of creation, the one who actually gives life to all creation, then you'll start to see why sin is so horrific, why it's so important, why it needs dealing with a death. I don't know if you like watching the David Attenborough shows on TV. Yeah, I like watching those. And there is a little story about an octopus. There's a mother octopus who goes down to the very, very bottom of the ocean. And it's freezing cold down there. Even worse than it's been out here today. Freezing cold. And it goes down there to lay its eggs. So it lays its eggs down on the sea floor, and it cannot move off the eggs until they've hatched. Can't go and get food. It's just going to be sat there. 2 years, the octopus sits at the bottom of the ocean, slowly freezing to death. After 2 years, the eggs hatch. And out come these little tiny octopus like this. And do you know what they do straight away? They swim off immediately. And there's this picture in the David Attenborough documentary of this tiny octopus who just swims away. He's got 8 legs, and he doesn't even use a single one to wave goodbye to his mom, who's down on the sea floor. 8 legs, not a single thank you. To his mom, who's just spent 2 years, the last 2 years of her life, giving everything for this little egg, for this little octopus. And then the mummy octopus dies on the seafloor. It's a little snapshot of what it is like, what sin is like. God is the life giver. Every single breath you ever take, every time your heart beats, all of the oxygen that we need, everything is reliant upon God fueling it. And yet most of us spend most of our lives swimming away without a care in the world, without a single tentacle of thank you That is outrageous. But it also has consequences. If you say no to the one who gives life, guess where that leaves you, ultimately? Without life. Death. When God comes to Egypt that night, he's coming to people in Egypt who have said no to him and his life for years and years and years. And it's not that they haven't been warned. They've just had 9 other plagues. They've been told about the 10th plague. They know what's coming. Some of them actually listen and end up going out with the Israelites. But many of them don't. And on that night, it is horrific, but death comes throughout Egypt. Christianity is high stakes. It's life or death. Now, wonderfully, the story also tells us that God does provide a way out. Instead of the firstborn in Israel dying, they're to slaughter a lamb instead. And you can try and imagine the scene. Weirdly, they've had a lamb or a goat living in their house for at least 4 days. That's what God tells us is going to happen. So it's almost like they kind of get to know him. It's like part of the family for a little while. And that's kind of the point. He becomes part of the household. But on that night, instead of the firstborn son dying, they've already taken this lamb or this goat and slaughtered it. The blood, the price has been paid. The life has been spent. The death has happened already. And it's splattered across the door to remind them. And you can imagine if you were one of the firstborns, you'd be checking that everything had been done just as God had said. As evening comes and they're supposed to slaughter the lamb, if you were a firstborn, I'm sure some of you are firstborn men, you'd be like, right, Dad, have you definitely got the right lamb? Have you definitely got the right herbs? Have you definitely, done it over the fire, just like God said? Have you done everything that you're supposed to? Because my life is on the line here. This sacrifice better be perfect. It better be right. Because my life is on the line. God provides the way out. This theme of the firstborn and death is all throughout the Bible, and including my least favorite story in the Bible. My least favorite comes in Genesis. And that is where Abraham is told to go up a mountain and take his firstborn son and sacrifice him up the mountain. It's a horrible story. Until mercifully, thankfully, he doesn't have to go through with it. Why? Because God provides a different sacrifice. It's like the Passover story. Instead of your firstborn dying, I will provide a different sacrifice. It all sounds very heavy, because it is. One of the worst things I've had to do in my life is jury duty. Not because it was really boring, but because of the case that I was sat on. It was a horrific murder. And it was of a young man, 20-odd years old, and he was killed in his own flat by one of his friends. It was grim. But the worst thing about it was sitting through the sentencing, which is where victims, sort of family members, are able to speak. And his mum stood up and said some words, which will stick with me forever. The day I was told of my son's death, the bottom of my world fell away. No words can describe how I'm feeling. It's destroyed me knowing his last breath was in pain. I've been robbed of my precious, beautiful boy. I'll never recover from this. I feel totally lost without him. No parent should ever have to feel this pain. That's true, isn't it? 6 weeks ago, a young man connected to our church died, and to sit with his man, it's unspeakable pain. To lose a son. The claim of Christianity is that God has experienced that pain in order to rescue us. For God so loved the world, he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. There are many things God could give you, but they're all things that he's already made. He could give you the whole of creation, but it wouldn't be that impressive, because he can just make another one. There's one thing God could give you that would be incredible, and that is himself, his Son. The only thing he only has one of. The only thing he hasn't created. The one thing, one person who's been there with him throughout eternity. And the point of the story with Abraham and the story of the Passover is that it is pointing us to the day that God provided his Son in the place of us. That is what Christianity's claim is. It's high stakes, it's life or death, but no matter what the cost might be to follow Jesus, you can't ever feel that you've been shortchanged. God gave you everything that he had when he gave you Jesus. When Jesus died, he was taking all of that sin, all of the judgment, all of the pain that we read about in the Passover was poured upon Jesus. And that changes everything. It changed everything for Israel. They were born out of that sacrifice. And God then takes this community and he's given them a whole new identity. He calls them his firstborn son. He loves them as if they are his children. And that is how he treats Christians. Your fundamental identity is that of a child of God. He gives unconditional love to his people. It changes how we live. The rest of Exodus, I wish we could go through it. The rest of Exodus talks about God setting up a community on earth that live in a way that reflects who he is. And it's beautiful. It's astonishing. People genuinely caring for one another, loving each other, respecting one another. People resting, celebrating, like all the time. It changes everything. And the belonging, they are a family of God, not just a nation. Is being a Christian worth the cost? You may be in a generation where, for the first time in our country for a long time, being a Christian will cost you a lot. It might cost you a job. It might cost you relationships. It'll certainly mean saying no to things that most people will say yes to. Is it worth it? Well, God has given everything that he had, or at least the most precious thing, so that you might become part of his people. So you might grapple with Christianity. You might decide it's not for you. But what you can't say is that it doesn't have an incredible offer at the heart of it. That is that no matter who you are, what you've done, God has put his own Son in the place that you deserve to be. And in doing so, he then calls you his child, gives you an identity, gives you a security, and he gives you a hope beyond this life. The Passover here, if you noticed, links back to our last talk where it said, I'm going to bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. When the great judgment comes, none of those gods are anywhere to be seen. You imagine the night before, the Egyptians crying out to their various gods. God of the Nile, God of the harvest, God of this, God of that. Save us from what the Israelites have said is going to happen. But where are they when the Passover comes? They're nowhere. They're powerless. So will anything else that we trust in be on that final day. There will be no escape from the judgment. The only escape is through the blood of God in Jesus Christ. It's high stakes, it's life or death, and it's costly to follow Jesus, but it is worth it. Not only are you freed from that death, you're provided with a new life. And if you're asking what that life looks like and how it actually makes a difference, well, you could read the rest of Exodus or ask a friend who's here, because we can't go into it now. But it is life transforming. I'm going to give you just a moment, give you a bit of silence. I wonder where you would have categorized yourself when I started this talk. Someone interested, seeking, looking, thinking. Someone coasting, someone committed. Just take a moment. Think about what I've said. Think about what this passage says. And then I'm going to pray for us.